Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In one of the previous videos we talked about the 3-act system, and basically this is just another variation of that type of mindset when we're taking a look at how we're structuring our story. Now there's a lot of crossover when it comes to different modes of storytelling, particularly when we're talking about visual versus literary. Now what we're going to be taking a look at specifically tends to we see in visual, like TVs and movies, but they can still be applied to how we tell our stories. There's a content creator on TikTok by the name of Gina Denny. Now I've been watching her content for a little bit now and it's actually pretty fantastic. I will link her TikTok account in the description below, so please take a look and learn as much as you can from her because she knows what she's talking about. So let's get into the actual video.
Can I do a video on pinch points? I absolutely can. My name is Gina. I am an author, editor, publishing professional. I help you make your writing better. All right, so pinch points are when we are talking about like a 7 or an 8-point plot system. So these are very, very loose outlines. These are not like like all the way through. We're talking about the big, most common 8 beats that you need to have in a story. So the first one is going.
So beats is another way of doing the same type of 3-act system. And we'll actually go over the book Save the Cat, which is designed specifically for a beat-type system compared to a 3-act system. So she's going to go over a little bit more in it, but I just wanted to talk that we're going to try and get to a beat sheet that she talks about here, and we'll actually learn as another way of telling these stories.
Be a hook or an establishing shot, and then we are going to have the inciting incident, pinch number 1, which we are going to talk about more here in a second. The midpoint, which actually is just like a big chunk of your story. It's often like a third of your story. It's a big chunk of the story in the middle. This is the fun and games section. Then we have pinch number 2, which we are going to talk about. The plot turn, where everything turns and becomes terrible. We have the darkest moment.
So these are pretty basic when it comes to different types of storytelling expectations from our readers. We want to make sure that we're setting up the climactic issues, and we want to make sure that our story has weight for our readers. And what she's talking about here is different ways of telling that and encouraging that emotional development.
Rising action and climax at the end. So those are our basic beats going through the entire structure of the story. So but what are these 2 different pinch points? If you go back to a classic hero's journey, the first pinch point is the call to adventure.
This is very important because we need to make sure that we are allowing for the story to take place. It is one thing if we are forcing a character to be in part of the story, but if we don't give the character agency, we rob the ability for our readers to actually feel emotionally for them.
Are you going to do something about this? You've had the inciting incident. Life has changed. Something's going wrong. Are you going to do anything about it? You're a wizard, Harry, Barbie. You have to want to know, what are you going to do about this? This is where the hero, the protagonist, the main character reluctantly moves into this other world. You're a wizard, Harry, right? Like sometimes they are excited to do it, but they don't know what it is they are getting into. If Harry knew all of the danger that awaited him, he wouldn't have probably taken that step. If Frodo knew how hard it was going to be, he would have approached this very differently. There is a difference between like going on a hiking adventure with your friends and then like fighting for your life for a year and a half.
The reason why this is so important is because, like I said earlier, we want to make sure our characters have agency. We don't want to make it seem like they are just puppets to our will. We have to give a reasonable expectation for our readers to feel for these characters that we've created. If we just rip them of their autonomy, our reader is going to be unable to connect as well. Yes, I could take a character and force him into a position where he has to act in a very specific way, but that doesn't feel right for readers. We need to make sure that our readers feel like there's actually a story unfolding, not necessarily that there's strings on the puppet.
So if they go into it willingly, it's because they don't totally understand what it is they are doing. But oftentimes it is like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. I have to do something about this, but I don't really want to. Like, that's the fight. So pinch number 1 is the call to adventure, the presentation in front of them. Are you going to take this chance? Are you going to go on this adventure? Are you going to change your life? In the first episode of...
She's going to talk a little bit more from different perspectives and different TV shows and movies that talk about this, but I really want to emphasize this point that there is additional weight that's added to the decision for our characters to actually take part of the story. There's something about human psychology when things are forced upon us that if we don't take things on willingly, we actually sort of reject it. So as readers, we're actually inferring that same mindset to our characters. If they don't have a reason, a willingness to partake of the journey, it kind of robs us of weight for this character and understanding what's going on.
With the Gilmore Girls, that pinch is Emily saying, now that we are financially involved in your lives, we would like to be actually involved in your lives. Lorelai has a chance to turn back. She has crossed the threshold. She is in the Gilmore's house. She has got what she wants in hand, but she can walk away if she wants to. She can walk away, find another way, tell Rory that she's not going to Chilton. Now, we know that she's going to do this because otherwise the story doesn't happen, right? That's the pinch point. Now that we are financially involved in your lives, we want to be actually involved in your lives. You have a choice to make. This is not going to be as easy as you thought it was going to be. Are you going to make that decision? Are you going to come back and cross the threshold again?
So another way of looking at this is that this choice is definitely two different aspects. On one hand, we can just accept that this is the way it's going to be, that there's no debate. But because the character has to debate whether or not they're going to go back on what they said, there is a tension that we are creating there. We are adding value to the decision that they're making. Value is not something that's nothing. It's not made of air. There's a cost to it. And as readers, we are expecting costs. And so one of the ways that we can convey costs when it comes to storytelling is emotionally. And when we're emotionally adding costs, like for instance, in this situation with the Gilmore Girls, there's an emotional cost that's being presented here. You have a character that received money, but the money came with stipulations. Now, I don't know the story of what's going on, but needless to say that the emotional toll that is going to be required because of this money means that the money that is being used for this other character now has weight to it. It's not freely given. It doesn't have value. The value has been exchanged from a funds cash to an emotional weight.
In Hamilton, this pinch point happens at the Revolution. So as Hamilton is turning a point in his career, is he going to be a socialite? Is he going to be the writer? He wants to fight. Is America going to seize the opportunity that is in front of her? Is Hamilton going to seize the opportunities that are placed in front of him? We see Hamilton take a leap, marry one of the Schuyler sisters, even though it wasn't the one that he wanted in the first place. And Aaron Burr, who is the foil to him, says he's going to wait for it. Aaron Burr does not take the leap. So these are two diverging paths in the same story. Revolution is where that pinch point happened.
So what they're talking about foil is that you have certain characters that have ways of playing off of each other. Foil is another word for sword. So when you have two characters are foils to each other, the image here is that they are sparring. Typically, you'll see the sparring with like a rapier or a sword that, a single point sword where they're going back and forth. This gives you a understanding of the situation and actually reveals more about the character than just stating it outright. We want to make sure that when we're revealing information, we're actually revealing information in a way that is engaging, which is why we don't do info dumps. Textbooks have info dumps. We don't use info dumps because we lose that emotional weight, that realization, that discovery for our readers that gets lost in the mix. So we do things like having foils. We show the character in a deeper way that is not necessarily as straightforward and can add a little bit of layering to the character itself.
Pinch point number 2 happens near the end of the second act. It is not the last thing in the second act. The last thing in the second act is the plot turn, the thing that thrusts us down into the darkest moment. So the pinch is the point before that where the character has a choice to make, and they're going to make the wrong one. They're going to do the wrong choice. Otherwise, again, the story would be wrapping up. We would be fixing everything too fast. This is where the character has gone from reluctant to taking ownership of their decisions, that they are now no longer reactive, they are being proactive. And then that's where they screw it up and it all goes to hell, and we have our darkest moment. And part of that darkest moment feeling is, if I had only just not done that.
This is extremely important because what we're talking about here is that, like I said about earlier, with agency in our characters, we need to make sure that we're creating a delineation between what is going on and what could have been, or at the very least hinting that things could have worked out a specific way. If we back our characters into a corner, we rob them of agency. We rob them of the ability to actually do what they're trying to do. So when we give them choices, and obviously I'm talking not literally here, we're talking about choices, whether or not they can make the decisions that they have to do. We don't want to make sure that we're forcing a character to go through motions, because our readers can feel that. We don't want to stick a person in the hallway where there's no options. We want to make it so that they try different doors. They try to at least seem like there are different doors that they can take. And by these decisions, if we are doing it right, we're allowing our characters to have agency. And by extension, our readers feel like we are with these characters in their journey as they're making the decisions that they are doing.
I had taken so-and-so's advice, if I had done what I was supposed to do, if I had made the smart choice, part of that has to be their ownership of that decision. This is oftentimes like bad guys close in. So the antagonists are sometimes increasing in number, or they are closing in. You feel the circle of danger closing in around your character.
Now, one of the things that she talks about taking ownership here is this is important, because if you have a character that's not willing to take ownership of the situation that they're in, this can actually rub readers the wrong way. Yes, we can say, hey, our character is in a bad situation, but because we can point to, hey, they made this decision to have the situation play out the way that it is, even if they didn't fully understand what was going on, they have to take ownership with it, or else they become an unpleasant character. Typically, when we're talking about a character that doesn't take ownership, what typically comes to mind is a villain or an antagonist, where, woe is me, this isn't my fault, this is what I was forced to do. These are the phrases that you have for a villain, where they're not taking ownership of the situation and they are blaming anybody else so that they can get away with whatever that they're trying to get away with.
In Barbie, this is a very literal closing in of bad guys. We now no longer just have like something amorphous that's bothering her. She has literal bad guys at Mattel trying to put her back in a box and get her to stop asking all these questions. So we have a very literal manifestation of this danger closing in around. In that first episode of the Gilmore Girls, that pinch point is when Lorelai and her mom start fighting at dinner. So at first you kind of think like, oh, well, you know, of course she's going to accept the money. Being around your mom, it can't be that bad. You're being a brat. And then pinch point number 2 is where we see how bad it really is. We see that her parents still have not forgiven her for these decisions that she made when she was 16 and 17 years old, that they are willing to pick a fight about it on their very first night reuniting with their daughter. So this is serious. She's going to have to put up with a lot of trauma.
Now, when they're talking about this, we're adding additional emotional weight to the decision that they made earlier. These are some of the ways that we can talk about increasing the tensions in our story. This is a very important thing, because typically what we try to do is we try to walk from one side of the story to the other. But that's not really what the reader wants. They want to talk about experiencing the same things as the characters are experiencing, but we need to do it in a way that makes sense, that you can relate to what's going on. The indecisions that they are dealing with, those choices about how things are going to play out, this is important, and we need to make sure that our readers have an understanding of that weight
in order to accept this money. So now the decision that she has made, going in eyes wide open, is she going to continue on that path? She is. She's going to proactively make this decision because it's the right decision for her daughter, and she.
So what she's talking about specifically here is that there's a scale in the ways that people see reality. And the more that we add to one side of the scale, the more there has to be on the other side for things to make sense, to be balanced out. So when they're talking about the cost of the emotional weight here, this means that in order for that not to be negative, there has to be an equal amount of weight on the other side. This is a way of showing how much the character Lorelai loves her daughter and cares about her daughter, because she's willing to go through all these emotional baggages and hardships and traumas. This shows how much she loves her daughter.
She's going to put up with all of that pain. This is what takes us into that darkest moment where she walks out front. She's like, I feel smaller. How do I look smaller? How do I feel? Like, She's willing to go through this because it's the right decision, but she is doing it with eyes wide open. She knows exactly what she has gotten herself into. It is going to be like this until this situation is over, and she is going to survive it. She's making that choice on purpose. In Hamilton, that pinch point happens as Washington.
Another way of looking at this particular scene is that it's also talking about the weight and the decision to continue going, that endurance. When we see people, typically when we see people going through tough times, we want to encourage them, or heart goes out to them to keep on going down this path that they have. Yes, they've made the decision to be there, but if it's the right decision, we want to see them to continue going down the right way. If there's enough setup where there is showing that this is valuable, that this is a good thing, that this decision is made well, not easily, but well, we can encourage our reader to want the character to continue going and not take those shortcuts. Those shortcuts are ways that the antagonist does things. This is a way of telling stories, is that we want to encourage the reader to enjoy the story, but also in a way where they feel like their value has been gained in the telling of the story.
Washington steps down. Washington is Hamilton's great protector and defender, and he steps down. Washington no longer has the hero on his side, no longer has Washington on his side. This is also where Burr confronts him about the embezzlement, but learns about the affair. So Burr is triumphant and Hamilton is on his way down. So we have not quite hit rock bottom yet, but we are making decisions that are leading us to rock bottom. Hamilton takes control and takes ownership of those decisions.
Another way of thinking about this is that when she's talking about things aren't going to rock bottom, where they're making these decisions, these characters are making bad decisions, one of the ways that we can get our readers invested is actually showing them, hey, these decisions are actually bad, but our character isn't doing the bad thing. We're implying that our reader should want the character to be a good person or to achieve the thing that they want. But if we can get our readers to recognize that and then show that our character isn't doing that for a time, but eventually they begin to make those good decisions, this is a way of implying to our reader that you were right, you know what's going on. And this is a way of emotionally investing into the story for our readers.
Releases the Reynolds pamphlet, just throws his political career away, never going to be president now. So Burr's triumph has been stunted, but Hamilton is taking ownership of his bad decisions. And this is part of what leads to his darkest moment. This is what leads to his son getting into a duel, which leads to the actual darkest moment in the story. From a storytelling standpoint, they moved those events around in Hamilton. So Philip Hamilton doesn't actually die until 1801, but this scene happens prior to the election of 1800, because that's narratively where it needed to fit. We needed to have this darkest moment before Hamilton starts to reemerge and come back out into American politics.
So sometimes what can happen when they talk about adapting historical situations to movies or books is that they'll move things around narratively speaking. The term for that is artistic license. So this can happen all the time, which is why typically I don't have a problem when they move things around for the story if it has a value added to it.
They took some poetic license and some artistic license with the story in order to get that pinch point in the right place. So we have the Reynolds pamphlet in which Hamilton is starting to take ownership for his own decisions. And that ownership and those decisions are what lead to the downfall. His son is defending his honor and gets into a duel about it. And that is what leads to the darkest moment. Those things have been rearranged from history because a real person's life is not always a perfect story beat for beat the way that it's supposed to happen. And by the way, when you come in, you're like, well, but that's not realistic. This is not the way that it would work. We know. The stories are fantastical. They are escapism. They are fun. They are not going to follow the pattern of real life in the right order. So sometimes you need to do what works for a beat sheet and for a plotting structure rather than what actually happens in real life or the way that you think a story needs to play out.
So in the end, the plot structure for pinch points is a very loose way of talking about structuring and talking about how to actually tell the story. Like I said, I'm planning on doing a beat sheet overview, so taking a look at different movies and whatnot, and taking a look at Save the Cat, the beat sheet system, but I wanted to go over this because this is a really good way of actually talking about how to structure your story. And she makes a very good point about how things don't always work that way, but because of how we tell stories, and we want to make sure that things are emotionally satisfying, unless you mess with the importance of some things and add different things, it's hard to maintain that as a historical narrative, because just that's not how people actually interact. We don't have third acts or second acts or anything like that. We use that imagery when it talks about overcoming things in our own personal lives. But when we're talking about a story for somebody's life, I mean, decades of people interacting with each other, it's hard to actually put a plot structure over that. So in the end, this is what I wanted to talk about, is just that there are different ways of telling stories and different things that we're looking about when we're telling these different stories, and how we are emotionally engaging our readers in that. All right, so that's all I had for today. As always, I will be linking the resources I use in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave it in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe. Yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I